Please give it a like, subscribe to the channel, and tell me in the comments where you're hearing my story of revenge. I want to know how far it's gone. Today I will tell you true story from California that one of my friends told me. I will share you as is it. Let's begin. That morning after my husband Adrian was buried, I learned just how fast family can turn into scavengers. Walked downstairs still wearing the same black dress from the funeral. It smelled of rain-soaked lily and the dust of freshly turned soil. My hair was pinned awkwardly, my steps slow, and the house, the one I had lived in for 4 decades, felt strangely unfamiliar. Not because Adrian was gone, but because of what I saw in the foyer. People laughing. Not soft, grieving laughter, but bright, greedy, brittle laughter that clashed against the humming of the chandelier. The moment my foot touched the last step, someone said, "Damn, she's still breathing." Dad said she'd be gone before the will was read. It was my grandson, Evan, 17 years old and carrying himself like the house already belonged to him. He slapped a neon orange sticky note onto the antique console table. "Mine," he said, then marched toward the living room to tag more. My granddaughter, Mia, twirled in the center of the foyer with her tablet raised, using an interior design app to scan the walls. Once she's out, we can turn the guest suite into a glam studio. Maybe tear down these ugly curtains. These ugly curtains, I wanted to tell her, were sewn by my hands when your mother was born. But I stayed quiet. I had perfected the art of silence long ago. Vivian, my daughter-in-law, floated into the room carrying champagne. Glasses on a polished tray. "We're celebrating Adrian's legacy today," she announced as if hosting a gala. Not mourning him, not comforting each other. Celebrating. I stood there, unnoticed, unwanted, and apparently already written out of the story. My seat at the dining table, my seat was gone. In its place, they had set up a cold metal folding chair. No cushion, no back support. A chair that wasn't meant for a person. Just a placeholder. "You'll be more comfortable in the laundry." "Nook," someone said without looking at me. Comfortable. The word felt like a joke. Carried my cold chicken and overcooked vegetables to the room where a mop, bucket and detergent bottles were stacked against the wall. That was my new dining space. From the dining room, I could hear every word they said through the thin sliding door. This house reeks of old perfume and expired memories. She kept everything so outdated. Once she's out, we can modernize the entire property. Do you think she even knows what day it is? She looks gone. Adrian built a fortune. What did she build? Stew? Blankets? Laughter erupted like fireworks. They thought I couldn't hear them. They thought the humiliation would slide off my shoulders like dust. But something inside me, something long buried, twitched awake. I touched the inside pocket of my sweater. There it was. The folder I had kept hidden for 15 years. The proof of the sacrifice no one knew about, not even Adrian's children. The document that held the truth. I was the one who saved the company when it was collapsing. My dowry, my heirlooms, my jewelry, all sold quietly to rescue what he built. I had been the invisible backbone of his empire. They didn't know. They never cared to know. But Adrian knew. And his last will. Oh. He made sure the truth would be heard. Upstairs, someone dragged a suitcase across the hardwood floor. Someone else shouted, "This room is mine." A third voice said, "We should repaint the master bedroom before the weekend." The master bedroom I had shared with Adrian for 39 years. I rose slowly from the folding chair. My bones ached, but my resolve sharpened. They believed I was weak. They believed I was fading. They believed I was almost gone. But they had made one fatal mistake. They forgot who raised the man, whose empire they were fighting over. They forgot who funded the lifeline that saved it. They forgot who held the final hidden chapter of Adrian's legacy. The will reading was only hours away. And for the first time in decades, I felt something powerful humming beneath my ribs. Not fear, not sadness. Fire. Because soon, very soon, they would learn that I wasn't the ghost in this house. I was the storm they never prepared for. And when my name is read aloud in that will, every smile in this house is going to die before I do. They thought I had forgotten everything. That age had softened my memory and blurred the past. If only they knew how clearly I remembered the night Adrian came home years ago with defeat hanging from his shoulders like a wet coat. It was 15 years before his death, back when Veil Industries was crumbling. I still remember the click of the front door that evening, the way he paused in the doorway, as though the house itself might judge him. His tie was crooked, his eyes shadowed, his hands trembling so subtly only someone who had held those hands for decades would notice. He sank into the armchair across from me, staring at the cold fireplace. "We're out of time," he whispered. "If we don't secure collateral this week, it's over." I didn't ask how bad it was. His silence told me everything. Veil Industries had been drowning for months, contracts pulled, investors walking away, banks circling like vultures. Adrian was too proud to ask anyone for help, too loyal to let his employees go, too hopeful that he could fix it alone. But alone doesn't rebuild an empire. And sometimes the hands no one sees are the ones doing the real work. That night, after he finally fell asleep on the couch, I went upstairs to the cedar chest I had kept untouched since our wedding day. Inside lay my dower passed down from generations. My mother's ruby choker, the bangles I wore as a bride, the sapphire earrings Adrian had gifted me when our daughter was born. Pieces of my life, memories made solid. I gathered them in silence, wrapped them in a shawl, and carried them to the jeweler who opened early at dawn. He didn't blink when I sold everything, and I didn't blink when I wired every cent directly into Veil Industries. Emergency account. I didn't leave my name. I didn't tell Adrian. I didn't tell anyone. All I said to him when he woke the next morning was, "Go. Save your company. Don't let them see you break." He never asked where the collateral came from. He wasn't foolish, he knew. He just didn't speak of it, and neither did I. Within 2 days, the deal was secured. Within a week, the company was stable. Within a year, they were calling Adrian a visionary. They never knew the vision had been written in my sacrifice. And when the IPO pitch came, when Adrian was losing his grip on the right words, and the board rejected every draft, I helped again in a way no one would ever suspect. Late at night, after everyone slept, I wrote a proposal. Pages filled with expansions, projections, and strategies I had polished before motherhood swallowed my career. I signed it under a pseudonym Al Arsolis and mailed it to the company with no return address. 2 days later, Adrian came home saying someone had anonymously sent the most brilliant framework the board had ever seen. I remember stirring my tea, pretending to be interested. "That handwriting looks familiar," he said, laughing softly. I shrugged. "Perhaps the universe wants you to win." The IPO launched 6 months later. It saved the company. It made millions. It built their pride. And erased me. Not intentionally, not at first, but erasure doesn't need malice. Sometimes all it needs is silence. I was the ghost who supported him, the shadow behind the man who carried the spotlight, the invisible architect of their inheritance. And now, those same people tore my home apart with sticky notes and careless insults, unaware that the woman they mocked held the receipts of their entire fortune. Upstairs, I heard drawers being dragged open again, someone else rummaging through my things. claiming pieces of my past as their future. I walked slowly toward the staircase, feeling the folder pressed against my ribs like armor. Inside, the original drafts of the IPO plan, the bank record of my secret deposit, the pseudonym tied to my registered intellectual property, everything the family didn't know existed. And the lawyer Mr. Harrington already had copies. The will reading would not be the event they imagined. No neat division of wealth, no easy claiming of rooms, no smooth inheritance, because Adrian, in the end, did what he had rarely done in public. He told the world what I had done in private. And the truth was about to detonate right in their laps. My fingers grazed the banister as I ascended the stairs, each step louder than their laughter had been. Let them pack. Let them measure. Let them believe they've won. They were counting millions that didn't belong to them. And soon, they would realize they weren't just fighting over an inheritance. They were fighting against the woman who built it. 5 days after Adrian's funeral, I learned that cruelty doesn't always come with raised voices. Sometimes it arrives with polite smiles, clipped words, and decisions made in hallways where you're meant not to hear. It was a Tuesday morning. The house still smelled faintly of pine from the memorial wreaths, though most of the flowers were already browning in their vases. Sympathy cards sat unopened on the entry table, stacked like clutter. There was nothing sympathetic about the atmosphere inside. The family had moved past mourning. They had shifted into planning, not planning remembrance. Planning distribution. I stepped into the hall just in time to hear my daughter-in-law, Vivian, speak loud enough for the walls but not for me. "We've decided it's best if Evelyn moves downstairs," she said. "The utility room will do. She doesn't need much space." Utility room. She meant the laundry room. I stood still, my breath caught halfway between disbelief and something darker. Upstairs, I could hear them rummaging uninvited through what used to be my bedroom. Wooden hangers clattered. Drawers thudded shut. Suitcases rolled across the floor. My scarves, perfumes, journals, years of my life were being shoved into boxes labeled with careless handwriting. When I finally stepped closer, I saw the labels. Donate. Throw away. Old woman junk. They didn't even hide the words. One of Vivian's nephews, a boy who had once begged me for extra slices of pie, held a clipboard like a professional appraiser. "This table is perfect for my condo," he said. A bright sticker appeared on the oak surface. Mine. Another sticker marked the rocking chair, where I'd soothed my daughter through endless fevers. A third sticker clung to the record player Adrian and I used to dance to during power outages, back when the house was full of laughter instead of entitlement. Vivian turned to me with a smile sharpened by ambition. "She doesn't need a whole room to herself," she said to the others. "Just a little cot until, until I died." The words weren't spoken, but I heard them as clearly as if she'd whispered them into my ear. No one objected. No one defended me. Silence was their consent. I walked toward the so-called room they had prepared. The laundry space smelled of bleach and damp tile. A dim bulb flickered overhead, casting a sickly glow. In the corner sat a narrow cot with a thin grey blanket tossed over it. No pillow, no sheets. Just the bare minimum for someone they no longer saw as human. My suitcase, battered from years of travel, sat next to it, half unzipped. Someone had packed my belongings with the haste and disrespect reserved for unwanted items. On top lay a cracked picture frame of Adrian and me on our 30th anniversary. We stood in the rose garden, sunlight on our faces, happiness genuine in our eyes. That photo had once rested proudly in the upstairs hall. Now it had been thrown behind the refrigerator. I had found it only hours earlier, wedged between a broom and a dusty cereal box. To them, it wasn't a memory worth displaying. It was clutter to be hidden, I sat on the cot, the springs groaning beneath me. My knees stiffened, my hands trembled not from fear, but from the weight of remembering. I remembered the nights I stayed awake during storms, so the children wouldn't be afraid. I remembered hand-sewing curtains and cooking meals and turning this house into a home. I remembered tutoring them, calming them, cheering them through failures, celebrating their victories. I remembered everything, but they remembered nothing. Later that evening, after they enjoyed steak and wine in the dining room, Vivian slipped into the laundry room holding a towel and a bottle of cheap shampoo. "These are for you," she said, placing them down as though donating to a shelter. "You can eat after we're finished." After we're finished. I was no longer part of the family meal, only an afterthought. I nodded. I said nothing. Words spent on deaf hearts are wasted. After they quieted for the night, I opened a tin of soup I'd hidden in my drawer. No can opener had been left for me, so I pried it open using the end of a key. They said earlier, she built soups while Adrian built an empire. As if nurturing wasn't its own kind of empire. As if love didn't lay the foundation before wealth ever could. Stared at the cracked photograph of Adrian and me under the roses. I wiped the dust off the frame and pressed it to my chest. They thought they had pushed me into a corner, but corners can become fortresses. And tomorrow, I would make my move, because the next time they tried to bury me, I wouldn't just rise. I'd bring the truth up from the grave with me. The morning after they measured my bedroom walls for future spare conversion, I woke before dawn. The house was silent. Finally, though the silence felt less like peace and more like a breath held too long. I swung my legs off the cot and stood, joints stiff but determination sharper than any pain. Today was not for grieving. Today was the day I stopped letting myself be erased. Knelt beside the laundry room wall behind the rack where old mop heads hung, untouched, and lifted the loose floorboard I had hidden decades earlier. It creaked softly, like a familiar friend remembering my touch. Inside lay a worn, leather-bound folder. The folder that had lived in my shadow for 15 years. With careful hands, I pulled it free. Inside were not memories. They were weapons. The first document, the joint trust certificate, naming me Evelyn Vale not as beneficiary, not as bystander, but as co-founder. Not one of Adrian's children knew this existed. They assumed their father built everything alone. He didn't. The second document, the bank memorandum, signed and sealed, showing the deposit that saved Vale Industries from collapse. My dowry, my jewels, my inheritance, everything I owned of value sold quietly, then wired into the company's lifeline. They had been living off my sacrifice for years without ever realizing it. The third, the original handwritten IPO proposal. Pages filled with the same looping cursive I had always written shopping lists in. The proposal I'd written under a pseudonym, L.R. Solace, because the board would never have approved a woman's idea. I stared at the faded ink, remembering that long night at the kitchen table. Adrian had been pacing in the study, rejected draft after rejected draft scattered at his feet. He was exhausted, humiliated, terrified of losing everything he'd given his life to. So I lit a candle and wrote strategy. Projections, restructuring plans, every idea formed from the career I once abandoned, but never forgot. At sunrise, I mailed it anonymously. The board approved the mysterious strategist's proposal unanimously. It later became the backbone of the company's fortune, of their inheritance, but the legal proof of authorship, that was in my hands. And copies had already been delivered to the lawyer. By the time I arrived at Mr. Harrington's office later that morning, he was waiting. "Mrs. Vale," he said, rising respectfully. "I trust you're ready." I nodded and placed the folder on his polished mahogany desk. His eyebrows lifted slightly. He knew this wasn't an ordinary family dispute. We reviewed everything, page by page. The joint trust. The bank deposit. The IPO drafts. The pseudonym registration. The patent certification tying the strategy to my name. He called in a handwriting specialist, Dr. Holden, a quiet man with sharp eyes. He spent hours analyzing the original pages, noting the pressure points, the curve of each letter, the pauses between phrases. By late afternoon, he confirmed what I already knew. This is unquestionably your work, Mrs. Vale. It meant the plan every investor credited Adrian for had belonged to me. The intellectual property rights belonged to me. The residual profits still ongoing belonged to me. Vale Industries' greatest success had been built on my hands. And tomorrow, the family would learn that the woman they shoved into a laundry room had the legal power to flip their inheritance upside down. Mr. Harrington folded his hands. Are you sure? He asked. You want to reveal all of this during the will reading? You could pursue this privately. I shook my head. They tried to bury me, I said softly. Let them see what they tried to bury. He exhaled and nodded. He understood. As I left the office, the ocean wind brushed at my coat, the sky opening into shades of late afternoon gold. For the first time since Adrian's death, I felt steady. Not grieving. Not forgotten. Seen. I clutched the folder to my chest as I walked home. My steps were slow, but my purpose was solid. Every insult, every sticker, every whispered wish for my death, they had carved themselves into my resolve. Tomorrow, at the will reading, the truth wouldn't just echo. It would thunder. Because when I walked into that law firm, I wasn't bringing a folder. I was bringing their entire illusion to its knees. The next morning, rain streaked the office windows of Harrington and Bloom Legal Associates, turning the glass walls into a blurred mirror. The building looked cold, too modern, too sterile, and inside, the atmosphere was even colder. The Vale family sat waiting. Not for loss, not for closure, for money. Every seat near the front of the long conference table was already taken. The chairs were sleek leather, perfectly polished. The only folding chair in the entire room was placed deliberately at the far end, my seat. I approached it quietly. No one stood. No one offered their chair. They only stared, annoyed that I'd arrived at all. My son, Marcus, leaned back arrogantly in his seat. His suit was tailored, his hair slicked, his confidence inflated beyond repair. His wife, Vivian, sat beside him with crossed legs and a smug smile that said she already expected the house, the assets, and likely my absence from the world. Didn't think she'd make it, Marcus muttered, just loud enough. She looks like she'll fall apart before the reading even starts. I sat. My hands trembled, but not from weakness, from restraint. Across the table, my granddaughter Mia scrolled through her phone, murmuring to her brother Evan. I hope the lake house is mine, she whispered. Dad said Grandpa promised it. And the Mercedes, Evan added. He said that's going to me. Finally. They were discussing Adrian's legacy like children fighting over party favors. No one asked how I was. No one wondered if I had slept. No one considered I had been Adrian's wife for 41 years. To them, I was an inconvenient placeholder blocking their inheritance. When Mr. Harrington finally entered the room, the atmosphere shifted. He carried a thick binder, a stack of sealed envelopes, and a small digital recorder. His face was unreadable. Good morning, he said firmly. As executor of Adrian Vale's estate, I will proceed with the reading of his final will. The family straightened instantly. Marcus leaned forward. Vivian smiled tightly. Mia stopped scrolling. Mr. Harrington pressed a button on the recorder. A familiar voice filled the room. Adrian's voice, older, weaker, but unmistakably calm. If you are listening to this, the recording began. It means my time has passed. And the people in this room are about to learn what respect is worth. A few faces twitched confusion, annoyance. Not guilt. They didn't think they'd done anything wrong. Adrian continued. I made changes to my will shortly before my death. Some of those changes were inspired by things said in this home. Things recorded by our security system. Vivian stiffened. Marcus scoffed. Dad wouldn't. The recording cut him off. Marcus, Adrian's voice said steadily, every time you insulted your mother, every time you dismissed her, every time you joked about her death, I heard it. Marcus froze. Jaw dropped. Evan stopped breathing. Harrington flipped a page in the binder. As per Mr. Vale's new clause section 14B, each recorded insult directed at Mrs. Evelyn Vale results in a deduction of $100,000 from the speakers. Inheritance. Marcus shot to his feet. That's ridiculous. This isn't legal. It is, Harrington replied calmly. Your father signed and notarized it himself. The lawyer turned the page again. There are many recordings. The room went silent. Adrian's voice continued, especially the comments made 3 days after my funeral. Shame began to flicker in their eyes. Faint but present. Harrington read the transcripts one by one. She's still alive. Check her pulse. Old lady junk. She built casseroles. Adrian built a dynasty. Let's stick her in the shed. She should be gone soon. Every line struck the table like a hammer. Marcus's face reddened with every word. Vivian began to tremble. Mia covered her mouth. Evan looked like he wanted to crawl out of the room. Then the final transcript. Why is she even here? Harrington closed the binder. Total deductions for Marcus Vale, he announced, amount to $16.7 million. Marcus's face drained of color. You can't do this. Oh, but your father could, Harrington said. And he did. Marcus collapsed back into his chair, breathless. Vivian grabbed his arm, whispering frantic questions he ignored. Nobody looked at me. Not yet. They didn't know the real shock was still coming. The insults were only the prelude. Harrington folded his hands, eyes settling on me before scanning the room. And now, he said quietly, we move to the section that will reshape this entire estate. Every head snapped up. Every heartbeat quickened. Every illusion of inheritance hung by a thread. Because the next line in that will wasn't just a twist. It was the moment their world cracked open. Mr. Harrington let the silence stretch across the room like a drawn wire. Every pair of eyes wide, alarmed, desperate, fixed on him. Even Marcus, normally so loud and smug, said nothing. His jaw clenched hard enough to tremble. The next section, Harrington said, adjusting his glasses, pertains to the primary beneficiary of Adrian Vale's estate. The family leaned forward as one body. Vivian reached for Marcus's hand, clearly believing she was moments away from becoming the new queen of the Vale fortune. Mia straightened, smoothing her blouse as though cameras were present. Evan even whispered, "This is it," under his breath. They didn't look at me. Of course they didn't. To them, I was the afterthought in the folding chair. The burden. The placeholder. The woman they had already shoved into a laundry room and mentally written out of every future plan. But Adrian had always seen more. Harrington opened a sealed envelope, removed the thick ivory document inside, and read slowly. Section 8. Distribution of assets. To my wife, Evelyn Marin Vale. Every head jerked toward me. Vivian's mouth fell open. Marcus made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a growl. Mia blinked, stunned. Evan whispered, "No way." Harrington continued, "I leave full ownership of Vale Industries' remaining shares. All residuals linked to my intellectual property, the deeds to our homes, and complete authority over the Vale family trust. The words slammed into the room like a THUNDERCLAP. Vivian stood so fast her chair scraped loudly. What? No, no. She doesn't even understand finances. Harrington raised an eyebrow. Explain that to your father's signature. Marcus sputtered. Why would Dad? But the recording interrupted again. Adrian's voice filled the room. Because Evelyn didn't just stand beside me. She carried what I couldn't. She saved what I nearly lost. And she did it without demanding applause. A tremor ran through me, sharp and raw. I had never expected Adrian to say it out loud. Not even in death. He continued. You children benefited from what she sacrificed. You lived in a home she protected. You enjoyed an empire built with her silent strength. Vivian shook her head aggressively. This can't be right. She didn't build anything. Harrington's expression didn't change as he turned the page. There is more. He lifted another document, this one with a gold seal. This is a legal certification from the Patent Office regarding the strategical framework used in Vale Industries' recovery 15 years ago. Mia frowned. What strategy? Evan leaned closer. The big turning point. The one investors always praise Grandpa for. Marcus whispered, horrified. No. No, don't tell me. Harrington placed the certificate at the center of the table. It credits the intellectual property officially known as the Solace model to one individual. He paused, and then he said the words that sucked every particle of air out of that room. Authored and registered by Evelyn Marin Vale. It was as if the world froze. A glass slipped from Mia's hand and shattered. Vivian's lips parted, but no sound emerged. Evan's eyes widened like he had seen a ghost. Marcus stared at me as if he was seeing me for the very first time. Harrington continued, his tone steady and professional. Anonymously mailed. Written under the pseudonym L.R. Solace, and later verified by handwriting experts. The residuals from this patent total nearly $11 million in unused royalties. Unused. Untouched. Because I had never taken a cent. I watched realization ripple through the room slow. Heavy. Transforming. Everything Adrian had built was tied to something they never believed I had. My intellect. My strategy. My vision. Vivian finally found her voice. This is impossible. She made soup. She embroidered pillows. And she saved their father's empire, Harrington said firmly. The room imploded into whispers. Marcus looked at me like he'd swallowed dirt. You wrote that. You? His tone was dripping with disbelief. As if intelligence had an expiration date. As if motherhood erased identity. I met his stare. I didn't need credit, I said quietly. I just needed your father to survive. He blinked rapidly, his throat tightening. Shame splashing across his face. Harrington tapped the table. As stated in Adrian's will, all rights revert to Mrs. Vale. She may choose to use, distribute, or dissolve them as she sees fit. The truth settled like iron on their shoulders. Everything they thought belonged to them, every penny, every house, every asset, had just shifted into my hands. But the will reading wasn't over. Not yet. Harrington reached for one final envelope, the smallest of them all. Sealed. Labeled in Adrian's handwriting. For Evelyn. Read last. And I knew this envelope would change everything again. Because if the first revelation shattered them, the last one would destroy every illusion they ever held about who I really was. The room was silent as Mr. Harrington held the smallest affilium Envelope thin, ivory, sealed carefully, as if Adrian had known it would matter more than anything else. The others leaned forward instinctively, greedy for anything that might shift the tide back in their favor. That this envelope wasn't for them. It had my name on it, written in Adrian's slow, deliberate handwriting. Harrington handled it with the gentleness of sacred text. This, he said, was to be read only after all other sections of the will were completed. Marcus frowned. What else is left? Vivian whispered urgently. Maybe he left a second trust. Something separate. Hope clung to their faces like desperation wearing. Makeup. Harrington broke the seal. The sound was small, but its meaning enormous. He unfolded the letter and cleared his throat before reading Adrian's final words aloud. My dear Evelyn, I have spent a lifetime being praised for foundations you quietly built. You never asked for recognition, and I never found the courage to give it while I was alive. Marcus's face twisted. Vivian's eyes darted nervously between me and the paper. But Harrington continued, voice unwavering. The truth is simple. You saved my name, my company, and my legacy when I could not save myself. A tremor rippled through the room like a wave meeting stone. When Vale Industries was collapsing, it was your sacrifice that revived it. When I needed vision, it was your mind that crafted the model. When I stood before investors, it was your words that convinced them. Vivian's lips tightened into a thin line. Mia shifted uneasily. Evan lowered his gaze, ashamed. You were erased by my silence. I let the world believe I was the only architect. I was wrong. Harrington paused. My own breath faltered, the years of invisibility tallying themselves inside my chest. Adrian's voice returned in writing. Your name deserves to stand where mine once stood. So I leave you everything. Not out of charity, but out of justice. Marcus's chair creaked sharply as he clenched its arms. But there was more. To the rest of the family, if you ever questioned Evelyn's worth, intelligence or contribution, understand this. You have lived your lives on the foundation of her brilliance. You are not entitled to her legacy. The room erupted in shocked stares. Marcus erupted. No, Dad wouldn't. This is manipulative. Harrington didn't flinch. There's still one final clause. He lifted another document from the envelope, this one notarized and embossed. Vivian inhaled sharply. What now? Harrington read. Any descendant, in-law, or extended relative who speaks ill of Evelyn, demeans her, or attempts to challenge her authority over the estate, will forfeit any remaining shares or inheritance pending. Marcus shot to his feet again. This is tyranny. I'm challenging this. You're welcome to try, Harrington said mildly. But your father ensured this clause would withstand any courtroom. Marcus's face reddened. Mia whispered, What have we done? Vivian pressed her hands to her temples. All of this, because she wrote a few papers? Harrington looked directly at her. She built the company you've been living off. The weight of that silence was suffocating. Finally, Harrington folded the letter and placed it gently into my hands. This belongs to you, he said. I held it. The paper felt warm, as if Adrian's final apology had lingered on it. For the first time in 41 years, my contributions weren't invisible. My sacrifices weren't assumed. My intellect wasn't dismissed. I rose slowly, steadily. I didn't want revenge, I said softly. I wanted truth. Marcus finally broke, slumping into his chair like a defeated child. I didn't know, he whispered. You never asked, I replied. You all spoke louder about my weaknesses than you ever listened for my strengths. A tear slid down Mia's cheek. Evan couldn't even meet my eyes. Vivian crossed her arms tightly, bitterness twisting her mouth. But the war was already over. The empire they believed they had inherited belonged to the woman they'd shoved into a laundry room, and I wasn't done with them yet. Not even close. Because revealing the truth was one thing, but what I planned to do with the power Adrian left me would shake them harder than the will itself. It didn't take long for the shock from the will reading to transform into something uglier. Inside the family. Panic. By the time I returned to the estate that afternoon, the house buzzed with frantic footsteps and muffled arguments. The same people who had laughed over champagne days earlier were now packing at a speed usually reserved for evacuation drills. Adrian's final instructions had been crystal clear. They had 48 hours to vacate the property. All of them. Every single one. The court order signed, stamped, legally irrefutable was already taped to the front door like a scarlet warning. Inside, chaos unfolded. Boxes littered the hallway. Suitcases thudded down the stairs. Clothes, jewelry, gadgets, everything they had once claimed as theirs, now scattered in frantic piles as they tried to flee before the deadline. Mia stood near the entryway, folding scarves into a bag with trembling hands. Her usual arrogance had vanished. Her eyes were puffy, red, and wet. "I didn't mean everything I said," she whispered when she saw me, her voice cracking. "I was just going along with them." I didn't reply. Some apologies are simply too late to reach the place they need to. In the living room, Evan was shoving designer hoodies into a duffel. He lifted his head and froze when our eyes met. "We weren't supposed to lose everything," he muttered. "Grandpa loved us." "He did," I answered calmly. "But love doesn't excuse cruelty. And cruelty has consequences." He lowered his gaze, shame painting his expression. Upstairs, I found Marcus and Vivian in the master bedroom, my bedroom, arguing sharply while tearing their belongings from the closet. "This is unbelievable," Vivian snapped, stuffing jewelry into a velvet pouch. "Your father was manipulated." "He must have been." "By who?" Marcus barked. "She didn't even know about half of this." Vivian spun toward me. "There you are," she said bitterly. "Finally decided to show your face. Enjoying yourself?" I stepped inside the room, ignoring her tone. "This was never about enjoyment," I said. "It's about restoring what was mine long before any of you cared to notice." Marcus swallowed hard. He wasn't shouting anymore. He wasn't accusing. He just looked small. "Mom," he said hoarsely. "I'm sorry. I truly didn't know. I thought, Dad, you believed what was convenient," I interrupted. "Not what was true." He sank onto the edge of the bed, running a hand through his hair. "I don't know how to fix this." "You can start," I said, "by learning how to listen." Vivian scoffed. "She loves this. Don't you see? She finally gets to punish us." "This isn't punishment," I said firmly. "This is accountability. There's a difference." Her expression twisted into disbelief. "Accountability? For what?" "Words. Comments made in frustration." I met her eyes steadily. "For cruelty. For disrespect. For trying to erase me from a life I helped build." She opened her mouth, but Marcus raised a hand, silencing her. "Enough," he said quietly. "Just enough." His voice, for the first time, sounded like the little boy who once held my hand when thunder scared him. I walked out and left them to finish packing. Downstairs, I paused at the front door. The house felt different, lighter, quieter, as if it were finally expelling the weight of greed it had absorbed all week. On the porch, the pomegranate tree swayed in the cold breeze. Beside it, the nearly dead rosebush I planted decades ago still clung to life, one brittle stem, one stubborn sprout, I knelt and poured water from the old rusted watering can. Watching the soil darken. "We bloom again," I whispered. "We always do." When I stood, Mr. Harrington's car pulled into the driveway. He approached with a folder in hand. "Everything is settled," he said. "The house, the company shares, the patent, the trust legally and irrevocably yours." I nodded, but he wasn't finished. "There's one more choice you need to make," he said. "What will you do with the property once they're gone?" I glanced back at the house. The walls that once echoed with laughter, then later with ridicule. The rooms where I had built a family, and where that same family had tried to exile me. 1,000 emotions tangled in my chest. "I'll think on it," I said. He smiled softly. "Take your time. You've earned the right to decide." Inside, the last suitcases were being hauled toward the door. The final echoes of entitlement faded with every step they took toward the exit. The home was mine again. But I knew something they didn't. This house wasn't my destination. It was merely the beginning of the life I was finally free to choose. Because once they walked out that door, I wasn't just reclaiming my home. I was stepping into a power I had waited 40 years to claim. When the last moving van pulled away and the engine's rumble faded down the street, a strange quiet settled over the estate, a quiet I hadn't heard in years. It wasn't the hush of grief or the emptiness of loss. It was peace. Real peace. I stood in the entry of the house that had once held both my brightest memories and my deepest betrayals. Sunlight filtered through the windows, illuminating rooms no longer cluttered with neon stickers, arguments, or greedy hands. I walked through each space slowly, letting my fingers brush the surfaces they once claimed. The antique dresser Mia had eyed like a trophy. The record player Evans slapped a sticky note on. The rocking chair Marcus's children had called garbage furniture. Every piece felt different now, like the house had finally exhaled. But after the silence settled, I realized something. This home no longer belonged to me, not in spirit. Only on paper. It had seen too much neglect, too much disrespect, too many sharp words echoing off its walls, too much of me being pushed into corners. I didn't want to live inside its memories anymore. So, in the spring that followed, I sold it. Not in a fit of vengeance, not out of spite, but out of a quiet understanding. Some places are chapters, not destinations. With the sale finalized, I moved into a penthouse overlooking the coast in Monterey Bay. A place with pale curtains, wide glass windows, and the kind of soft ocean wind that slips into a home like a lullaby. No more folding chairs. No more dim bulbs flickering over mop buckets. No more rooms turned into exile. Just air, light, space and me. The patent royalties continue to arrive, though I rarely touch them. Instead, I created something new, something purposeful. The Veil Foundation for Silenced Women. It wasn't glamorous. No ribbon cuttings, no grand events, no plaques bearing my name. Just a growing fund dedicated to supporting women who, like me, had built brilliance behind closed curtains only to be dismissed, overshadowed, or taken for granted. Scholarships, housing aid, business grants, legal support for women whose ideas were stolen or minimized. The foundation grew quietly, just as I had once grown quietly in my own home. And seeing those women rise, women who had been ignored, overlooked, undervalued, became a form of healing I never expected to find. At home, my decor was simple. A few photographs, shelves of books I never had the time to read before, fresh flowers I bought for myself. And one drawing. A little crayon sketch on sun-faded construction paper. A stick figure version of me standing next to an oversized light bulb. My youngest grandson had drawn it years before the family taught him to roll his eyes at me. In bright purple scribble. It read, Grandma thinks better than computers. I taped it to my refrigerator the very first day I moved in. Not because I needed validation, but because it came from a time before they forgot who I was. And because it reminded me of something important. I had never lost my mind. I had only lost my voice. For a while. One warm afternoon, as I sat on my balcony sipping tea and watching the waves carve paths through the sand, a message arrived from Mia. A long apology. Messy, emotional, genuine. I read it. I didn't respond yet. Healing has its own pace. Not long after, Evan sent a letter too rambling, awkward, remorseful. Marcus eventually reached out as well. His message was simple. I'm learning how to be better. For what it's worth, I'm sorry, Mom. I didn't rush to reply. Forgiveness isn't a switch you flip. It's a door you open gradually, when you're ready. Some doors were still locked. Some cracks were still tender. But for the first time in years, the decision was mine. All of it, finally mine. As the sun began to set, washing the sky with gold, I stood at the balcony rail and inhaled deeply. The scent of salt and the hum of distant waves filled my lungs. And for the first time, I felt the truth settle peacefully inside me. They had buried me in assumptions. They had silenced me in my own home. They had measured my worth in convenience, not contribution. And still I rose, not to punish, not to prove a point, but to live. Because they spent years thinking I was fading. But this was only the beginning of the life I was always meant to claim. If you like my story, please like this videos. Subscribe channel and comment below what kind of story you like this. I will find for you real stories.